Greetings, everyone, to friends and colleagues from the American Dance Therapy Association here in Montreal. I'm Dr. Eileen Serlin and sharing this panel today. This is a panel on dance therapy and Jewish roots. It's based on a chapter in the book, The Oxford Handbook of Jewishness and Dance, and the chapter is by Dr. Miriam Berger and Dr. Marcia Kalina. The panelists, most of whom are in the chapter, Dr. Miriam Berger, Dr. Marcia Kalina, Susan Kleinman, Sharon Chaiklin, Alyssa White, and Aliza Rivka. They are not all here today, but we do have videotaped interviews of them. In the panel, we will present a rationale for the panel, and then each panelist will tell her story in relation to the theme of the panel. Thank you all for being with us today.
The Oxford chapter is in this book, which is a compendium of presentations at the Arizona State University conference on Jewishness and dance that took place in the summer of 2018. So Mimi invited me to be part of that panel presentation, and I developed a quasi-research project toward that goal. As Mimi noted, there was a curiously significant representation of Jewish women in the early days of the dance therapy profession. It seemed important to hear from those women in their own voices about that phenomenon, and to see if there were any common threads that connected their choice of becoming dance movement therapists, the trajectory that their professional lives took, and their Jewish roots. So that summer, I interviewed 8 of the original Jewish dance therapists, and I asked them the following questions. In what religious tradition or denomination did you grow up? With regard to Judaism, how do you identify now? What would you describe as Jewish values? If you think back to when you decided to become a dance movement therapist, do you think your Jewish upbringing and its values, as you define them, contributed to your making this professional choice? And if so, how? And in what ways might your Jewish background and its values have influenced the direction your contributions to the development of the field, your practice or teaching of dance movement therapy took? I'm going to give you some of the main themes that I drew out of their stories and anchor them into some of the Jewish teachings that we were familiar with. Clearly, many influences contribute to the direction of one's life, and this is merely one aspect of the whole picture. Almost every interviewee, let me just say 4 themes repeatedly emerged from interviewees' responses that connected with Jewish teachings. Almost every interviewee expressed some aspect of the first theme, the pioneering spirit. Learning something new and following one's impulse to lean into it, explore it, develop it, and follow where it led was an adventure. They thought of themselves as pioneers or trailblazers, which they certainly were. Some learned of Marion Chase's work in St. Elizabeth's Hospital or New York City's Turtle Bay or other places, the Henry Street Settlement that Mimi mentioned, and traveled from various parts of the country, following their inner voice to study with her. As one interviewee stated, I cannot say I knew what I was in for when I went to study with Marion, but I knew I had to go. They continued in that pioneering spirit to take what they had learned and bring it back to their hometowns or to the different countries around the world, which continues to this day. This theme of moving away from the familiar to follow one's calling is evident in several pivotal stories in the Torah. For those unfamiliar with Judaism, the Torah is the written biblical stories of the origins of the world and the Jewish people. It describes the experiences of those who cognized God and developed relationships with and faith in God and the people who followed them. It describes a wide range of human experiences and details the laws and moral and ethical codes that guide human beings' relationships to God and other human beings. A portion of the Torah is read each week, and its lessons are interpreted and discussed every Shabbat. Chapter 12 of Genesis opens with the words, Lech Lecha. It is a command by God to Avram for him to go. Go forth from your native land and your father's house to the land that I will show you. God promises that Avram and his wife Sarai will be the start of a great nation. They will be blessed and be a blessing to all the families of the earth. This theme is borne out again in the story of Joseph, who, left for dead in the desert, finds his way to Egypt and becomes the lead consultant to the Pharaoh. It is also found in the seminal story of Moses, who, despite his insecurities, is called to lead the Israelites out of slavery. These and many other stories an archetype of the strong pioneer who enters new, unknown territory based on a calling. Intellectual pursuit is the second theme that emerged from the interviews. The first generation of dance therapists developed the initial clinical practices, theoretical frameworks, and a professional organization where none previously existed. The originality of their work was itself intellectually stimulating. Knowing something in one's body through direct experience, translating it into clear definitions of what they were doing, then forming clinical theories, developing psychological, emotional, spiritual, and clinical practices, defining objective measures for assessment, and analyzing the resulting scientific data to demonstrate the validity and effectiveness of the entire endeavor were all steps in establishing the profession. As one interviewee stated, the whole language didn't exist. We wanted to be able to see what others were doing and what worked for them. Another interviewee stated that she became a dance therapist because it was the only arena in where she could investigate movement, personality, behavior, and expression. Jewish intellectual pursuit was formally cultivated in 200 of the Common Era. The Talmudic era ushered in the study and analysis of the Torah that became the focus of and path to Jewish survival. The Talmud is comprised of 63 books, big books, very big books, if any of you have seen them. A written record of questions, analysis, debate, and interpretation that sit alongside each of the oral laws of the Torah, meant for each next generation to study. This intellectual process is core to Judaism. It leads to curiosity and critical thinking that can be applied to all fields of life and is part of the impetus to challenge the powers that be, which is essential to secular focus on cultural progress and social activism. The third theme is the relationship of dance and mystical or spiritual experience. It contrasts to some more clinically practical, goal-oriented theoretical uses of dance therapy. Some forms of the work are more improvisational and undirected. They open the potential for creativity, healing insights, and or spiritual or mystical experience that can promote the lowering of personal or interpersonal boundaries, expressions of the collective unconscious, and the transcendent. Even more structured forms of dance therapy can bring one closer to the religious or spiritual realm. Using liturgical text to inform one's movement can open avenues for emotional healing and transformation, embodied religious meaning, enhance community, counteract the lost sacred part of prayer, and possibly facilitate intense spiritual experience. Expressions of this aspect of dance therapy are exemplified in these interviewees' statements. The following: God created the divine self to make room for creation. That is what I do as well. Dance's value is in bringing the body and the mind and the spirit together. And I'm not religious. While I have no relationship to a personal God, I have had mystical experiences. There are poignant references to the spiritual and mystical experiences through dance in the Torah and various Psalms. Most notable is the dance of Miriam, Moses' sister, that occurs once the Israelites are safely on the far side of the Red Sea. Imagine for a moment, as we do each year at our Passover Seders, after 400 years of the Israelites' enslavement and Moses' multiple unsuccessful attempts at persuading Pharaoh to allow the Israelites to leave Egypt, God has no more patience. God instructs Moses to tell them, the Israelites, to get ready to leave the next day. They must prepare a departure feast and mark their door lintels with lamb's blood, which is a defiant act that requires courage so that the angel of death will not visit their homes. That night they feast, and then they begin to hear the heartbreaking moans and wailing of their neighbors as the angel of death takes the firstborn sons of every Egyptian household. They spend the night gathering their belongings, preparing unleavened bread to travel into the desert with, flee with whatever they can carry, come to the Red Sea, take the risk of entering into its miraculously separating waters, and once safely across, turn to witness the drowning of the Egyptian soldiers who pursued them. Miriam, arguably not knowing what else to do after this series of dramatic and traumatic events, picks up the timbrel, encourages other women to do the same, and they dance. I imagine how celebratory, cathartic, and ecstatic that dance must have been. Similarly, around 1000 before the Common Era, King David of Israel danced to express his ecstasy when the Ark finally arrived in Jerusalem. Many of his songs also convey the same message. The first text of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar, was written in the 13th century in Spain. In the 18th century, the Baal Shem Tov began the Hasidic movement by reviving earlier teachings of the Zohar. Hasidism teaches that dance is one path to connecting with the divine presence. Perhaps the most easily relatable is the fourth theme elicited in the interviews that Lenny and Mimi also mentioned, Tikkun Olam, or repair of the world. This theme was endorsed by most of the interviewees. They were attracted to therapy as a profession because of its role in social action through individual or group healing. Whether or not religiously affiliated, most conceptualize their work with this phrase as shorthand for ameliorating people's suffering. One participant stated that she believes Tikkun Olam is involved in all therapy. Another likened dance therapists to those who in the old days would have been ritual healers, who used liturgical dance and singing prayer as part of community building and healing. Another interviewee summed it up this way: I left religion for a social, political world that espoused making the world a better place with respect for all kinds of people. The Torah is replete with stories that instruct Jews to care for others, especially the vulnerable. Over the millennia, Tikkun Olam has come to refer to repairing the world by addressing the ills of all marginalized people. It is fundamental to the religion and the moral mission of Jewish ethics. Rabbi Isaac Luria conceptualized it thus: when the world was created, the divine self shattered, and some spark of the divine was contained in each of God's creations. In other words, the world is broken. All human beings have a role in fixing it. Human action is divine import, and we are not obligated to complete the work, neither are we free to desist from it.
Thank you. Great, and now we have virtual presentations from those who we hope would have been back with the divine, because that's what we're here to do, repair and restore in partnership. And the other is Lador Vador, which means literally from generation to generation. We're mandated to teach our children, the traditions. And so in those traditions, I would like to frame this workshop as well. So we're trying to move quickly. We have a lot of material. So personally, now going from the large picture to the small, in terms of generations, intergenerational, I am a second generational dance movement therapist. I was in the first class, first at NYU in 1971, and then Hunter, 1971. And in terms of honoring, I want to dedicate this workshop. Mimi Berger can't be here today, so hello, Mimi. And really, I think Marcia and I, she contacted. Marcia will tell you the story of how the book and the chapter and this presentation is a way of really documenting that work. And I think Mimi has spearheaded it. She was my supervisor at Bronx State Hospital, 1971. I consider her my teacher, my mentor, and it's dedicated. Makes me emotional. So just quickly, my story about how Jewish roots influenced. Let's see if this will, good, I don't need a. We come from the Ukraine. So my grandparents, or my great-grandparents actually, these were their parents, Joseph and Chaika Perlmutter from Kamenets-Podolsky. I went back there. And some of, I think, what we're talking about is something we inherited. None of us that I know of ever thought we were going to choose this strange profession. But there's a sort of a spark that I'm now recovering and trying to find the roots of. Where did it come from? And we were all folk dancers. That's my great Aunt Ray, who did what you call the Isadora back in 1920, really, as folk dancers. So, so just quickly, I went to Israel when I was 14, got involved in a Zionist youth group, found Israeli folk dancing. That's really been my path into dance therapy. I'd never seen anything like building community on a Friday night. I'm just going to quickly talk about some of the values that I absorbed through that later I think you'll hear echoed in some of the other stories of the dance therapists and what influenced them. Creating a new Jew, we were idealistic, we were building the land, we were farming, we were strong, we were pioneers. Celebrated the farmer, the earth is a big part of the values then. It goes back, I've tried to find some of the ancient healing practices, and they come up in the mystical tradition. The dance is prayer. It's less, these are on a kibbutz. People now are experimenting, you'll hear more about that later, ways of bringing the body back into Judaism, since it's somewhat gotten lost in a patriarchal verbal tradition. So some characteristics of Israeli dance. Celebrating the origins, so where did it come from? And I had the great pleasure, as did Judith, of dancing with the great Fred Burke at the 92nd Street Y in 1962 in New York. And as we're discovering, as I'm discovering in this conference, things are coming back full circle. Now Mimi has established a dance therapy program at the 92nd Street Y, which has really birthed a lot of the dance and Jewish roots. Circle lines, couples. The Jewish dance was created actually in 1948 by some dance ethnographers whom I met at the Hebrew University, taking ancient steps, Romanian Hurriman circle, weaving together, knowing that a new culture needs dance and songs to celebrate and concretize, which is all the more reason why we shouldn't lose it. A lot about building resilience. You can't jump and dance and be depressed at the same time. And so it starts in the Bible, David's dance, and I'm going to try to hurry up because my time is up. Miriam, celebrating that. And finally in healing, this was on the 70th anniversary of Israel's founding, as you can see, from the Holocaust to new life. And again, that's basically the theme, is we're still here. And so thank you very much, Marcia. Now we're going to see a video of Dr. Miriam Roskin-Berger, board-certified dance movement therapist, licensed creative art therapist. Dr. Berger is a pioneer in dance therapy, focusing on the field through both the lens of art and the lens of science. She is currently the director of the dance therapy program at the Harkness Dance Center, the 92nd Street Y in New York City, and at Les Grands Ballets Canadiens de Montréal. She currently teaches dance therapy at New York University, where she was director of the dance education program 1993 to 2002. She was the director of the Creative Arts Therapy Department of Bronx Psychiatric Center from 1970 to 1991, while also a core faculty member in the NYU Dance Therapy Program. A founding member of the American Dance Therapy Association in 1965, she was its president from 1994 to 1998 and chair of the National Coalition of Creative Arts Therapies Associations.
The Oxford chapter is an exploration of the possible reasons why so many Jewish women were involved in the development of the profession of dance therapy in the United States. There were quite a few non-Jewish women also involved in this development, and this study is in no way meant to diminish their contributions. And in addition, this study does not maintain that these women discovered dance therapy, the healing aspects of dance. That, of course, has been a part of most cultures since the beginning of time. This is an examination of the process that these women went through as they contributed to the development of the healing aspects of dance into a viable discipline and profession in the 20th century. It is remarkable that Jewish women played such an outsized role in the development of dance therapy in the United States. Even though the founders of the field, notably Marion Chase on the East Coast and Mary Whitehouse on the West, were not Jewish, the majority of the first generation of leading dance therapists who began working in the 1940s, the 1950s, and the early 60s had Jewish backgrounds. These original women include Janet Adler, Irma Dasamontes Alperson, Bea Becker, Cynthia Barrow, Ruthanna Boris, Norma Canner, Mara Cappy, Sharon Chaiklin, Joan Chodorow, Blanche Evan, Joanna Gewirtz Harris, Beth Kalish, Stephanie Katz, Susan Kleinman, Marcia Leventhal, Lee Strauss-Mislansky, Nitza Brody Miller, Iris Rifkin Gaynor, Elizabeth Rosen, Susan Sandell, Claire Schmace, Roberta Schlossgow, Elaine Siegel, Arlene Samuels Stark, Shirley Weiner, Alyssa K. White, Rhoda Winter Ellis, and me. Certain social factors seem to influence many of us. In particular, many of us had ties to New York City, where a network of Jewish communal and cultural organizations, including the 92nd Street Y and the Henry Street Settlement House, hosted social, political, and artistic programs. These organizations offered excellent dance programming at a time when institutional support for modern dance was rare. They often linked dance and the arts to larger political messages of personal liberation and collective social good, themes that would become resonant for many pioneers of dance therapy. Perhaps also significant in light of their future therapeutic work, many of these early leaders in dance therapy grew up in Jewish communities marked by profound trauma. Many had parents who had fled poverty and entrenched anti-Semitism in Europe. One early dance therapist, Lee Strauss-Mislansky, had herself escaped from Germany as a child with her family. Another first-generation dance therapist, Elaine Siegel, wrote a book about her childhood in Nazi Berlin. These Jewish women, who were, in a sense, the mothers of this new profession, established practices, organizations, and theoretical frameworks that remain influential today. Their contributions include the early dance therapy master's programs at Hunter College, Claire Schmace and Alyssa White, and New York University, Marcia Leventhal, Iris Rifkin Gaynor, and myself, the dance therapy and then the creative arts therapy department at Bronx State Hospital, Alyssa White and myself, and a book, Foundations of Dance Therapy, about the life and work of Marion Chase, which was written by Sharon Chaiklin and Susan Sandell. Later, some of these women founded other master's degrees programs, including those at Hahnemann Medical College, Beth Kalish, and Lone Mountain College, Joanna Harris, Goucher College, Arlene Samuels and Sharon Chaiklin. Iris Rifkin Gaynor was a protege of Blanche Evans, a very early pioneer who did unique work with neurotics in children and did much to spread her work. Ruth Anna Boris had been a Balanchine ballerina, and her ballet background deeply informed her dance therapy efforts. Joan Chartereau and Janet Adler created a theoretical perspective of dance therapy based on several Jungian concepts. Cynthia Beryl and Stephanie Katz researched the effect of dance therapy on those with head injuries. Janet Adler and Beth Kalish did important work with autism. Elaine Siegel created a theoretical framework based on psychoanalysis. Irma Alperson developed a theoretical rationale for dance therapy based on Eugene Genlin's concept of the felt experience. And most of these first-generation dance therapists were founders of the American Dance Therapy Association in 1965. Jewish dance therapists were also strongly represented among the next generation of influential leaders in the field as well. And two of them are our panelists today, Lenny Serlin and Marcia Kalina. And also I want to mention that there are many dance therapists in Israel. In fact, there are more per capita in Israel than in any other country in the world. Many of these first and second generation dance therapists were president of the ADTA, editors of the American Journal of Dance Therapy, and members of the ADTA Board of Directors. Most served on the faculties of new master's programs, worked as clinical staff members at psychiatric facilities, or both, and many of them specialized in developing original methods for working with specific populations or diagnostic categories. So, in light of this history, it is worth considering whether any distinctly Jewish values affected and continue to affect the evolution of dance therapy. Did these women's Jewish backgrounds influence their approach to the field? Are there connections between Jewish values, experiences, and traditions and the development of dance therapy in the United States? What can we learn by considering the connections between Jewishness and dance therapy?
Now we have Susan Kleinman, who is also a charter member of the ADTA, serving this association in many capacities, including president. She's currently a trustee of the Marion Chase Foundation, a creative arts therapy supervisor and dance movement therapist for the Renfrew Centers, and she was the first dance movement therapist in Western Pennsylvania, later in Florida. Susan Kleinman has published extensively, presented widely, and is the recipient of the American Dance Therapy Association's 2013 Lifetime Achievement Award. Her work is featured in the documentary entitled Expressing Disorder: Journey to Recovery. Thank you.
Acting on being a Jewish dance therapist is an interesting issue for me because I grew up in a small Midwestern town, the gateway to the Ozarks, where there were very few Jewish people. What I absorbed had to do with being a part of a larger unit. To me, it was not only the people in my community in Joplin, Missouri, but more so, it was the other Jewish families who lived both in town and out of town in Oklahoma or Arkansas or Kansas, and would come in for the holidays. So I was used to having that kind of atmosphere to connect with. I've always known I am Jewish. My Jewishness, though, is not so much religion as connection and being a part of a movement. And so that's what has been important to me. And I think that's what has carried over into dance therapy for me. When I heard about this profession called dance therapy, actually, it wasn't even a profession. I was in college and I went to, for the summer, I went to Perry Mansfield and heard other people talking about dance therapy. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. The only book that was written was the one by Libby Rosen. So I came home, and my mother, who was also very educationally minded, very political, very out in the world, feeling what was important was that I not be stuck in small town Joplin, but that I be able to develop. And so we found dance movement therapy actually from an article in the Kansas City Star about Sue Ellen Freed, a young Jewish mother at that time who is still dancing in her 90s now. And we connected. She took me with her to Osawatomie State Hospital. And then I took her with me emotionally when I went to study with Marion Chase in Washington that fall. I don't think anybody in Marion Chase's office was Jewish, but there were people that visited. Meanwhile, I was just absorbing whatever I could. I was 22. I really didn't know what was going on here, except I was kind of following a path. Consciously, I was not aware of the path, but unconsciously, I just went with whatever I seemed to need to do and wherever I seemed to need to go. I think that may be part of what I inherited through my culture as a Jewish person. I met Sharon Chaiklin. I met Claire Schmaze there. They both had long ponytails, and I would see them coming and going. And I met in a meeting where we discussed forming an organization. I met Beth Kalish, who had come in from Philadelphia, and I met lots of other people too. But I think what I want to share about being a Jewish dance therapist is that it was the cultural element that drew me to taking the risk as a very shy little girl from Joplin, Missouri, taking the risk to open up to all these amazing people, mostly women, who had danced. Some of them had danced professionally. And I mean, I'd gone to Marianne Hatley's dance studio. What did I know? So I felt kind of inadequate, but they became my role models. And so when I went back then to Pittsburgh, after I got a job in Pittsburgh, I was the first dance therapist in Western Pennsylvania. And then later, I was the first dance therapist in Florida. And I somehow got the courage to take the risk to become whomever I am today and to keep on working at that. And I do believe that that came from the cultural element of being Jewish, and that I had been brought up as. In my hometown, we had a temple, not a synagogue. It was not called a synagogue. And I couldn't tell you anything more about the Jewish words I didn't know and never have. But I do feel like I belong here with you and with everyone else.
Hi, Alyssa. I want to thank you again for participating in this interview, and let's get right to it. Okay.
Sure. Thanks,
Great.
Marcia.
Sure. So first question is, in what religious tradition or denomination did you grow up?
I grew up as a secular Jew. There was no religion in the household, but there was a lot of tradition and culture. And also growing up in a multicultural home, my father was from the Philippines. I had a very rich background, but my dad was very much in line with the way my mother thought, her values. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say what that is, but I certainly do feel Jewish. I went to Workman Circle Camp as a kid.
Okay. Thank you. So with regard to Judaism, how do you identify now?
I'm pretty much the same way, very much secular Jew.
Okay. What would you describe as Jewish values?
That is a difficult question for me, because I assume that the values that I grew up with are Jewish, even though they've never been stated. But the biggest thing in my family was equality, and helping other people, making sure people had what was needed. And my parents were union organizers. So whether those are Jewish values or not, I think in part they are, Pika Molim and all that. And so I feel very identified that way.
Okay. Any other things that you might think of as Jewish values or that have influenced you?
Besides food?
Including food? I don't know.
Well, with my mother's mother, my Jewish grandmother at home, there was always this wonderful Jewish cooking, as well as Filipino cooking.
Okay.
And then there was American cooking.
Okay. So if you think back to when you decided to become a dance movement therapist, do you think your Jewish upbringing and its values as you define them contributed to your making this professional choice? And if so, how?
Well, I suspect so, even though that was not a conscious thought on my part. I had always been looking for something to do with my dance. I danced professionally for a while, and I came to New York to be a professional dancer, but my mother had died, and I was probably in a clinical depression. I was a studio dancer, and so I was thinking about going to college. And that's when I first heard about someone, about Marion Chase, because I had asked about someone combining psychology with dance. I was intrigued when I was teaching children about the way children learned, and the differences in learning styles and the way they would approach the material. So I was very curious about that. And I think I loved working with the patients in the hospital. I did have a private practice, but that was not as satisfying as working in the hospital. There's something about bringing life to people that that just thrills me. I feel that in my teaching also, that my goal in teaching is not just the principles of dance therapy, but having people use who they are, learn who they are in the service of working with the patients.
Mm.
So whether that is Jewish or not, I don't know, but it certainly is in keeping with my upbringing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was quite fortunate growing up because I had, since my parents were always on strike, my teachers always had me on scholarship. So they gave to me and I'm giving back, so to speak.
Nice, nice.
So
Okay. I
don't
guess then the last question. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something else?
I don't know if that answered your question or not. But
Well, it's an answer. It's an answer. And if something else comes to you, then maybe you'll include it in the your answer to the last question. And that is, in what way or ways might have your Jewish background and its values influence the direction that you took your contributions to the development of the field in your practice or teaching of dance movement therapy?
when I first after I took Marion Chase's course in 1963, there were a group of like-minded people, Claire, Beth, Sharon, Mimi. We were all active in civil rights. And I think this desire to learn what we were doing and to find out what we were doing and how we were doing it and what to describe it, and the need to I guess this is I guess my curiosity. I don't know how much of that is me and how much of that is Jewish. I mean, certainly there were a lot of political debates going on at home and a lot of books and things like that. But so to find like-minded people and who were interested in the field for very much the same reasons that I was, I think that pulling together, that we've kind of formed a group of like-minded people who felt that an association might be helpful. And I think I just have to say something, that when Clara and I and Martha Davis applied for our grant at Hunter College, we had asked for stipends for minority and low-income people. I think that was a reflection of Claire's and my values, and she certainly came from a secular background and politically involved family also. So the more I think about what we did, the more proud I am of that, frankly. Anyway, so I think those are how our values came into the program, and certainly I've continued on that path. Even when Hunter closed, you know.
Yeah. It's interesting actually, because I think community is a really big part of also being Jewish, and it didn't occur to me until you were speaking now. I don't think I included that in the original study, but I think that's something to note.
Well, I came from a very, very, I came from two communities, the Jewish side, who were always over, and the Filipino side, who's definitely very communal minded and family oriented. And if I say the Jewish side were books, music, politics, the Filipino side were athletics and food and community. Food too on the Jewish side, but so they kind of meld together for me. You know, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
There is this thing about being human.
Yeah.
You know, these common human values.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much.
You're
Um,
welcome.
I'm going to stop the recording now.
I'm sorry I'm not able. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there.
Well, we miss seeing you in person, but we're very glad that you could be here in this particular way. So thank you again.
You're welcome and thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.